The red forest of Karun was not meant for humans. The air shimmered with toxic spores, and the trees bled resin like open wounds. Ethan Cole moved carefully through the undergrowth, his breathing steady inside his cracked exploration helmet. He had crash-landed on the alien world 3 days earlier, and survival had become his only mission. That was when he heard the scream. It was sharp, desperate, and unmistakably intelligent. Not an animal, not the wind, but a voice begging for life. Ethan followed the sound, pushing past thorned vines and glowing fungi. The scene that greeted him froze his blood. A massive creature loomed in a clearing, all claws and armored flesh, its many eyes locked on a lone alien woman. She was tall and graceful even in terror, her skin a pale silver blue, her eyes wide with fear. One arm was injured, glowing blood dripping onto the forest floor. The monster roared, lifting its crushing limb for the final blow. Ethan didn't think. He acted. Raising his last energy charge rifle, he fired. The shot struck the beast, exposed joint, sending it howling in pain. The monster turned, enraged by the human's interference. Ethan stood his ground, heart pounding, firing again and again until the weapon overheated. The beast lunged, but Ethan rolled beneath its strike and grabbed a fallen crystal spear from the ground. With a final desperate thrust, he drove the spear into the creature's core. The monster collapsed, shaking the earth as it died. Silence returned to the clearing, broken only by Ethan's heavy breathing. The alien woman stared at him in shock. Then slowly, she lowered herself to the ground, safe but trembling. Ethan approached cautiously, lowering his weapon. He raised his hands in peace, hopping the gesture translated across species. The alien woman studied him with intense curiosity rather than fear. Her eyes shimmered with intelligence and something deeper, recognition perhaps. She spoke in a melodic language Ethan could not understand, her voice soft yet strong. When he did not respond, she touched her chest and said, "Sailira." Ethan nodded, pointing to himself. "Ethan," he said slowly. Sailira smiled faintly, then winced as her injured arm trembled. Without hesitation, Ethan opened his med kit, carefully applying sealant and bandage foam. She watched every movement, surprised by his gentleness. Among her people, strangers rarely offered mercy, especially not to another species. When the treatment was done, Sailira placed her uninjured hand over Ethan. Her skin was warm, pulsing softly with light. She bowed her head, a gesture of deep gratitude. Ethan felt a strange weight in his chest, a sense that this moment mattered far more than survival. As the suns dipped low, Sailira gestured toward the distant mountains. Her tribe awaited her return, and she wished him to follow. Though uncertain, Ethan agreed, knowing that staying alone in the forest meant death. The journey took an entire day. They crossed glowing rivers and fields of floating stone. Along the way, Sailira taught Ethan simple words through gesture and tone. He learned she was a sentinel of her tribe, sworn to guard sacred lands. The monster he killed was a void ravager, a creature feared even by warriors. As they walked, Sailira watched Ethan with quiet admiration. A human, fragile yet fearless, had faced a nightmare without hesitation. When they finally reached the crystal veil, Ethan was stunned. Towering spires of living crystal formed a vast city, humming with energy and life. Alien beings of many forms paused as Sailira entered, murmurs spreading like ripples. She spoke rapidly to the elders who approached, her voice filled with emotion. She pointed toward Ethan, then toward the scarred forest far behind them. The elders turned to Ethan, their expressions unreadable. One stepped forward, examining him closely. "You are the off-worlder," the elder said in broken galactic trade speech. "The one who defied death for one of ours." Ethan nodded slowly, unsure what judgment awaited him. The next morning, Ethan was led into the Great Circle. Hundreds of tribe members gathered, their crystal armor reflecting the twin suns. Celera stood beside the elders, her arm now fully healed. She met Ethan's gaze and inclined her head respectfully. The elder raised his staff and spoke. By ancient law, a life saved at the cost of one's own risk binds honor across blood and stars. At his signal, something unbelievable happened. One by one, the entire tribe lowered themselves to one knee. Then they bowed, not to a king, not to a conqueror, but to a human survivor. Ethan's breath caught. He had never sought glory, only survival and compassion. Celera stepped forward and placed a glowing crest into Ethan's hands. "This marks you as kin friend," she said, her voice clear and proud. "You will never walk alone on this world." Emotions swelled in Ethan's chest as the tribe rose, their eyes filled with respect rather than fear. Days later, repairs to Ethan's ship were complete. As he prepared to leave, Celera walked with him to the edge of the veil. "The stars will call you home," she said softly. "But know this, your courage changed our path." Ethan smiled, placing his hand over his heart. "You saved me too," he replied. As his ship lifted into the sky, Ethan looked down at the crystal veil. A place where a single act of mercy reshaped destiny. Far below, Celera watched the stars, knowing that legends were not born from power, but from compassion, courage, and the choice to stand against darkness. And across worlds and time, the story of the human who saved one life and earned the bow of an entire tribe would never be forgotten. Ethan believed his journey had ended when the crystal veil vanished beneath the clouds. He was wrong. The stars stretched endlessly as his ship moved through silent space, the kin-friend crest resting beside the control panel, glowing faintly like it remembered the hands that placed it there. Ethan replayed the events again and again, wondering how one desperate choice in a hostile forest had rewritten his fate. 3 jumps into hyperspace, the warning alarms screamed. Unidentified vessels emerged from shadow, sleek and predatory, their hulls marked with the sigils of the Korath Dominion. Slavers, conquerors, hunters of anything that could not defend itself. Ethan's damaged ship had no chance in a fight. Weapons were offline, shields barely holding. The Dominion hailed him, their voice cold and amused. "Human vessel," the transmission snarled. "You carry alien property and restricted artifacts. Power down and prepare for reclamation." Ethan's jaw tightened. He thought of Celera, of the bow of an entire tribe. He would not kneel now. He rerouted all remaining energy into the engines, forcing a blind jump. Space twisted violently as the ship tore itself through unstable corridors. Alarms blaring until silence swallowed everything. When Ethan regained consciousness, the ship was drifting. Systems dead, stars unfamiliar. And surrounding him were ships, not of the Dominion, but of the Crystal Tribes. Massive crystalline vessels shimmered like living constellations, weapons charged but not aimed at him. A calm voice filled the cockpit, familiar and impossible. "Kin-friend Ethan," Celera said. "You are not alone." His breath caught as her face appeared on the cracked display, composed yet fierce. "The Dominion tracked your jump," she continued. "They crossed a line forbidden even to conquerors." The Crystal Fleet formed a protective barrier around Ethan's ship, their hulls resonating with ancient power. Moments later, Dominion warships emerged, confident and arrogant. That confidence shattered. The battle that followed would be remembered for generations. Crystalline beams cut through Dominion armor like light through mist. Void Ravagers were unleashed from containment fields, tearing into slaver formations. The sky burned with color and fury. Ethan watched in awe as Celera commanded the fleet, her voice steady, her presence undeniable. She was no longer just a sentinel. She was a symbol. When the last Dominion ship fled or burned, silence returned. The Crystal Fleet remained, not as victors, but as guardians. Sailira's vessel docked with Ethan's ship. When the airlock opened, she stood there in ceremonial armor, glowing runes etched across her skin. She bowed not in formality, but in respect. "You saved one life," she said, stepping closer. "And that life became a voice. That voice became a call. And now the stars have answered." Ethan struggled to find words, overwhelmed by the scale of it all. "I never meant to start a war," he said softly. Sailira smiled, a rare, gentle curve of emotion. "You did not," she replied. "You reminded us what was worth defending." News spread faster than light. The story of a lone human who stood against a void ravager reached neutral systems, frontier worlds, and ancient empires. Species who once dismissed humanity as fragile began to question their assumptions. Delegations arrived at the Crystal Veil, not to conquer, but to observe, to learn, to understand. And at every gathering, Ethan stood not as a ruler, but as a witness. A reminder that strength did not always come from fleets or armies, but from the will to act when fear demanded silence. The Dominion retreated from entire sectors. Slave routes collapsed. Predators reconsidered their prey. Among the Crystal Tribes, a new tradition was born. When a child faced their first trial, they were told the story of the human who did not run. Not as myth, but as truth. Sailira and Ethan often walked the veil together beneath glowing skies. Two beings from distant worlds bound by a moment of shared defiance. Their conversations were quiet, thoughtful, filled with meaning beyond words. "You changed us," Sailira said one night as stars drifted like embers above. "We once believed survival was enough. You showed us that compassion is a weapon too." Ethan looked out at the horizon, remembering Earth, remembering who he had been before the crash. "Maybe," he said, "but you showed me I wasn't alone out here." Far beyond the veil, the galaxy shifted. New alliances formed. Old empires weakened. And somewhere in the darkness, those who thrived on fear now whispered a new warning. Do not underestimate humans. Do not underestimate mercy. Because sometimes, the smallest act of courage echoes loud enough to make the stars bow. The galaxy did not change all at once. It shifted quietly, like a tide turning beneath still waters. Long before the Dominion fleets retreated fully, rumors spread through trade lanes and shadow networks. A human had stood at the center of a battle not meant for his kind. A human had been protected by an ancient tribe that bowed to no empire. On distant worlds, war councils replayed fragmented recordings of crystalline ships tearing through Dominion armor. Analysts slowed the footage, highlighting one impossible detail. A fragile human vessel at the heart of the formation, untouched, guarded. They asked the same question in 100 languages. Why would an ancient species risk so much for one outsider? Among humanity, the truth reached Earth in pieces. Ethan's final distress logs, Dominion encounter reports, and Crystal Tribe transmissions arrived through diplomatic backchannels. At first, officials dismissed it as exaggeration. Then came confirmation. Humanity had been acknowledged, not as a threat, not as prey, but as something new. Ethan stood before the Crystal Council when the Great Convergence was announced. Representatives from dozens of species gathered within the Crystal Veil. Some towering and armored, others fragile and luminous, all watching the human who had unknowingly changed the balance. Sailira stood beside him, her presence calm and resolute. She spoke first, her voice carrying through harmonic amplifiers that resonated in every frequency. This human did not come as a conqueror. He did not seek alliance, tribute, or power. He chose to act when fear offered silence. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Ethan felt the weight of countless gazes, yet he did not bow. He had learned that day in the forest that courage meant standing. An elder from a machine civilization spoke next, its voice layered and precise. Our records list humanity as emerging, unstable, statistically insignificant. These records are now obsolete. Another delegate followed, scales glinting under crystal light. If one human could alter the will of an ancient tribe, what could a united humanity become? The question lingered, heavy with possibility. That was the moment the title was spoken. Not shouted, not declared, but offered. The starbound kind. A name given to humanity. Not for dominance, but for choice. Ethan felt Celira's hand brush against his arm, grounding him. This was never meant to be his burden alone. The Dominion did not remain silent. Wounded empires rarely do. Their remnants consolidated in dark sectors, rebuilding fleets, fueling hatred. And in their councils, a single name was spoken with venom. Human. When the first retaliation strike came, it was not against the crystal tribes. It was against a human colony world on the edge of explored space. A test. A message. The call for aid echoed across the stars. Ethan received it while walking beneath the veil's glowing arches. Celira's expression hardened the instant the transmission ended. They are testing the bond, she said. They believe humanity stands alone. Ethan turned to her, eyes steady. They won't for long. For the first time in recorded history, human fleets and alien armadas moved as one. Crystal ships aligned beside human steel. Energy signatures harmonized rather than clashed. Ethan did not command the fleets. He stood among them, a symbol rather than a general. As the allied forces arrived above the besieged colony, Dominion ships hesitated. Their scanners confirmed the impossible. Human vessels flying in formation with ancient powers. The battle was short, decisive. Not because of overwhelming force, but because the Dominion understood something too late. Humanity was no longer isolated. When the final Dominion ship retreated into darkness, the colony world remained standing. Its people watched the sky, witnessing the moment their species stepped onto the galactic stage. In the aftermath, Ethan walked among human settlers. They stared at him not as a hero, but as proof. Proof that they mattered. One child asked him why the aliens helped them. Ethan knelt and answered honestly. Because once, someone helped one of them. Back in the Crystal Vale, Celira and Ethan stood beneath a sky alive with drifting light. The galaxy will never see your kind the same way again, she said. Ethan exhaled slowly. I never wanted humanity to be feared. They are not, Celira replied. They are respected. Legends began forming even as Ethan lived. Some exaggerated. Some distorted. But the core truth remained untouched. A human chose compassion over caution. And the universe answered. Far beyond known space, something ancient stirred. Entities older than empires took note of the shift. For the first time in ages, they watched humanity with interest rather than dismissal. And somewhere in the red forest of Kern, where resin still bled from ancient trees, the place where everything began remained unchanged. A quiet clearing, marked not by monuments, but by memory, because the galaxy had learned a new lesson. Not all turning points begin with wars. Some begin with a single human standing between a monster and someone who could not run. And from that moment forward, whenever a species faced the choice between fear and courage, they remembered the day humanity was named.